ancient land of Israel, during the time of the Judges, there lived a young shepherd named David. Born in Bethlehem, the youngest of 8 sons of Jesse, David was a boy of modest beginnings but great promise. He spent his early days tending to his father's sheep, learning the ways of the land and the habits of the animals he guarded. David's life changed when the prophet Samuel, guided by God, came to Bethlehem to anoint the future king of Israel. King Saul, the reigning monarch, had disobeyed God's instruction. God instructed Samuel to visit Jesse and anoint one of his sons. Despite the appearances and stature of David's elder brothers, God chose the young shepherd, declaring to Samuel,
"Rise and anoint him. This is the one."
"The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Anointed with oil, David was filled with the Spirit of the Lord from that day forward. Although he returned to his sheep, his destiny was set on a grander path. One day, the Philistines, a formidable enemy of Israel, sent their greatest warrior, Goliath, to challenge the Israelites. Goliath, a giant standing over 9 feet tall, mocked the Israelites and their God, instilling fear in the hearts of Saul's soldiers. David, sent by his father to bring food to his brothers on the battlefield, heard Goliath's taunts. Despite his youth and inexperience in battle, he was incensed by the Philistines' blasphemy. With faith in God's deliverance, David volunteered to face Goliath. King Saul, doubtful but desperate, offered David his armor, but the shepherd boy declined. Armed only with his sling and 5 smooth stones from a brook, David approached the giant. As Goliath advanced, David declared,
"You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied."
With a single stone from his sling, David struck Goliath on the forehead, and the giant fell to the ground, dead. David's victory over Goliath began his rise to fame and favor among the people of Israel. David's courage and skill earned him a place in King Saul's court, where he played the harp to soothe the king's troubled spirit. He became a close friend to Jonathan, Saul's son, and a trusted warrior, leading successful campaigns against Israel's enemies. However, Saul's jealousy grew as David's popularity increased. Fearing David's potential to usurp the throne, Saul sought to kill him. Forced to flee, David lived as a fugitive, gathering a band of loyal followers. Despite opportunities to kill Saul and claim the throne, David spared his life, respecting Saul as the Lord's anointed king. David's integrity and faithfulness earned him respect and support from many in Israel. Saul's relentless pursuit of David eventually ended in tragedy. In a battle against the Philistines, Saul and his sons, including Jonathan, were killed. With Saul's death, the path was clear for David to become king. The tribe of Judah anointed him king in Hebron, and after a long civil war with Saul's house, the rest of Israel followed. As king, David conquered Jerusalem, establishing it as the capital of Israel and bringing the Ark of the Covenant there, symbolizing God's presence among his people. Under David's rule, Israel grew in strength and prosperity, and he was known as a man after God's own heart. However, David's life was not without sin and suffering. In a moment of weakness, David committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of his loyal soldiers. When Bathsheba became pregnant, David attempted to cover his sin by summoning Uriah from the battlefield, hoping he would lie with his wife. But Uriah's loyalty to his comrades kept him from doing so. Desperate, David arranged for Uriah to be placed in the front lines where he was killed. God sent the prophet Nathan to confront David. Nathan told David a parable of a rich man who took a poor man's only lamb, stirring David's anger. When Nathan revealed that David was the man in the parable, David was stricken with guilt. He repented deeply, and though God forgave him, the consequences of his sin brought turmoil to his household. The child born to Bathsheba died, and David's family was plagued by strife and rebellion. Despite his failures, David's heart remained devoted to God. He prepared for the construction of the temple, a task that would be completed by his son Solomon. David's psalms, born out of his experiences, expressed his deep faith, repentance, and worship, becoming a source of comfort and inspiration for generations. David reigned for 40 years, leaving a great legacy. His life, marked by triumph and tragedy, faith and failure, illustrated the complexity of the human condition and the boundless grace of God. From the lineage of David came the promised Messiah, Jesus Christ, fulfilling God's covenant and establishing an eternal kingdom.
Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go.
There was a severe famine in Bethlehem, a town in the land of Judah. A man named Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, decided to leave Bethlehem to seek a better life in the land of Moab, a neighboring country. When they arrived in Moab, tragedy struck. Elimelech died, and Naomi became a widow. Despite this, Naomi's sons married Moabite women. Mahlon married Ruth, and Chilion married Orpah. For 10 years they lived in Moab, but then disaster struck again. Both Mahlon and Chilion died. Then Ruth and Orpah became widows. With no husband or sons left to support her, Naomi heard that the famine in Bethlehem had ended, and she decided to return to her homeland. She encouraged her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, to return to their families in Moab, where they might have a better chance of finding new husbands. Naomi felt that she had nothing left to offer them, saying,
"It is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me."
Initially, both Ruth and Orpah insist on staying with Naomi. However, after further urging, Orpah tearfully returns to her people, while Ruth refuses to leave Naomi. In one of the most famous declarations of loyalty and love in the Bible, Ruth tells Naomi,
Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you.
When Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, they were poor and without resources. It was the time of the barley harvest, and Ruth, eager to provide for Naomi, went to work in the fields. According to Jewish law, landowners were required to leave the edges of their fields unharvested so that the poor and foreigners could glean, that is, gathered the leftover grain. Ruth went out to glean in a field and, by divine providence, found herself working in the field of a man named Boaz, a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's late husband. Boaz soon noticed Ruth gleaning in his field and was impressed by her hard work and loyalty to Naomi. He learned about Ruth's dedication and sacrifices for her mother-in-law. Boaz instructed his workers to leave extra grain for Ruth and even invited her to share a meal with him and his workers. He blessed her, saying,
May the Lord repay you for what you have done, and may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge.
Ruth returned to Naomi with abundant amount of grain, and Naomi realized that Ruth had been gleaning in Boaz's field. She was pleased because Boaz was a kinsman. Naomi then devised a plan to secure Ruth's future. She instructed Ruth to visit Boaz on the threshing floor at night after he had finished working. Naomi told Ruth to uncover Boaz's feet as he lies down and to lie at his feet. This act was symbolic and a way of asking Boaz to take Ruth under his protection as her redeemer. A redeemer is a relative who, according to Jewish custom, could marry the widow of a deceased relative to preserve the family line. That night, Ruth followed Naomi's instructions. When Boaz awoke and found Ruth at his feet, she asked him to spread his cloak over her, symbolizing his role as her redeemer. Boaz was deeply moved by Ruth's request. Boaz agrees to redeem Ruth, but he informed her that there is a closer relative who has the first right to redeem her. The next day, Boaz goes to the town gate where legal matters are settled. He met with the closer relative and presented the situation. This relative, however, declined to redeem Ruth because it would jeopardize his inheritance. Boaz then publicly agreed to redeem Ruth, took her as his wife, and preserved the family line of Elimelech. The union of Boaz and Ruth was blessed by God. Ruth soon gave birth to a son named Obed. The women of Bethlehem celebrate with Naomi, recognizing that Ruth's love and loyalty had brought her great blessing. Naomi, once bitter and full of sorrow, now found joy and fulfillment in caring for her grandson. Obed, the son of Ruth and Boaz, became the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David, the greatest king of Israel. This made Ruth a direct ancestor of Jesus Christ, according to the genealogy given in the New Testament. Ruth's unwavering loyalty to Naomi and her selfless love are central themes. Despite being a foreigner, Ruth's actions embody the highest virtues of faithfulness and devotion. Even in the midst of suffering, loss, and uncertainty, God's hand is at work, guiding events toward a greater purpose. Ruth's story shows how God can use unexpected circumstances to fulfill his plan. Just as Boaz took Ruth, a foreign widow, into his family, Christ redeemed and bring all who believes in him into God's family. Elkanah had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. While Peninnah had given him several children, Hannah was childless, and this became a source of deep sorrow and heartache for her. In ancient Israel, during the era of the Judges, there lived a woman named Hannah. She was married to Elkanah, a devout and respected man from the tribe of Ephraim. Each year, Elkanah would lead his family to Shiloh, where they would offer sacrifices and worship at the tabernacle of the Lord. Elkanah loved Hannah deeply and showed it by giving her a double portion of the sacrificial meat, hoping to comfort her in her barrenness. However, this only intensified the cruelty of Peninnah, who, out of jealousy, would provoke and mock Hannah relentlessly. The weight of her barrenness and Peninnah's constant taunts filled Hannah with deep despair. On one such pilgrimage to Shiloh, Hannah's grief became overwhelming. After the family meal, she quietly slipped away to the entrance of the tabernacle. There she knelt and poured out her soul to God in prayer. With tears streaming down her face, she made a vow, saying,
O Lord of hosts, if you will look upon my suffering and grant me a son, I will dedicate him to you all the days of his life, and no razor will touch his head.
In her desperation, she promised to make her son a Nazirite, consecrating him to God from birth. As Hannah prayed silently, her lips moved, but no sound came out. Eli, the high priest, observed her, and mistaking her for a drunken woman, reprimanded her.
How long will you continue in this drunken state? Put away your wine,
he said. Hannah, deeply distressed, responded, No, my lord, I am not drunk. I am a woman overwhelmed by sorrow, pouring my heart to the Lord. Please do not consider me wicked. I have been praying out of great anguish and grief. Realizing his mistake, Eli softened and blessed her, saying,
Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your request.
Encouraged by his words, Hannah left the tabernacle with a lighter heart, filled with hope despite her unchanged circumstances. In time, the Lord answered Hannah's prayer, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, meaning God has heard, for she said, I asked the Lord for him. Hannah's joy was immense. Her sorrow had turned into rejoicing as God had lifted the burden of barrenness. When Samuel was old enough to be weaned, around age 3, Hannah prepared to fulfill her vow to God. Despite her deep love for her son, she remained committed to the promise she had made. Elkanah supported her decision, trusting in her faith and devotion. Hannah brought Samuel, with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine to Shiloh. There she presented Samuel to Eli, the high priest, reminding him of their earlier encounter. I am the woman who stood here praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted my request. Now I give him to the Lord for his whole life. After offering the sacrifice, Hannah left Samuel in Eli's care. Though it was undoubtedly difficult to part with her son, she felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. She had kept her vow to God and trusted that Samuel was in the Lord's hands. As she returned home, Hannah's heart overflowed with gratitude, and she composed a song of thanksgiving called Hannah's Prayer. In it, she praised God's greatness and justice, celebrating his power to lift the lowly and bring down the proud. Her song reflected her deep understanding of God's sovereignty and his ability to transform sorrow into joy. Each year when Elkanah and Hannah traveled to Shiloh, she would visit Samuel and bring him a small robe she had made. Eli would bless Elkanah and Hannah, praying that the Lord would grant them more children in place of the one they had dedicated to God. Hannah's life continued to be blessed. The Lord gave her 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord, serving under Eli's guidance. He became a great prophet, judge, and leader in Israel, known for his unwavering dedication to God. Samuel's life and ministry were a testament to Hannah's faith and the power of her prayers. Hannah's story is of deep faith, perseverance, and trust in God. She teaches us that even amid deep sorrow and desperation, we can pour out our hearts to God, knowing that he hears and cares for us. Her life is a powerful reminder of the importance of keeping our promises to God and trusting in His timing and purposes. A long time ago, after the creation of the world and the fall of Adam and Eve, the earth became heavily populated. However, as humanity multiplied, so did their wickedness. Corruption and violence spread across the land, and people turned away from God, engaging in evil continuously. Saddened by the state of His creation, God decided to cleanse the earth and begin afresh. Amidst this widespread wickedness, one man stood out: Noah, a righteous and blameless man who remained faithful to God. As a result of the corruption on earth, God resolved to destroy all life through a great flood. However, because of Noah's righteousness, God chose to save him and his family. God spoke to Noah, revealing His plan and instructing him to build an ark, a massive vessel that would preserve Noah, his family, and representatives of all living creatures. God provided Noah with detailed instructions for constructing the ark from gopher wood, making it watertight with pitch, and dividing it into rooms. The ark was to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, with 3 decks, a window, and a door on the side. God commanded Noah to bring into the ark 2 of every kind of living creature, male and female, to ensure their survival. Additionally, Noah was to take 7 pairs of every clean animal, 1 pair of every unclean animal, and 7 pairs of every bird. He was also instructed to gather enough food to sustain his family and all the animals during their time in the ark. Despite the enormity of the task, Noah obeyed God's commands. When the ark was finally complete, God commanded Noah and his family, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives, to enter the ark. As Noah gathered the animals, they came to the ark in pairs, as God had instructed. Once everyone and everything was safely inside, the Lord shut the ark. 7 days later, the rain began to fall. But this was no ordinary rain. The fountains of the great deep burst open, and the windows of heaven were unleashed. Water poured from the sky and surged from the earth. The rain continued relentlessly for 40 days, causing the waters to rise higher and higher until even the highest mountains were submerged. All living creatures on land perished in the flood, leaving only Noah and those with him in the ark alive. For 150 days the waters overwhelmed the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the deep. Yet God remembered Noah and everyone aboard the ark. He sent a wind across the earth, causing the waters to recede. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were closed, and the rain ceased. After 150 days, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. Slowly, the waters continued to recede, and by the first day of the 10th month, the mountaintops became visible. 40 days later, Noah opened the ark's window and sent out a raven, which flew back and forth until the waters had dried up. Noah then sent out a dove to see if the waters had subsided. The dove returned, finding no place to rest. After 7 more days, Noah sent the dove out again, and it returned in the evening with a freshly plucked olive leaf, signaling that the waters had receded. Noah waited another 7 days and sent the dove out once more, but this time it did not return. Noah then removed the ark's covering, and by the 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth was completely dried. God then instructed Noah to leave the ark with his family and all the animals. Noah obeyed God and built an altar to the Lord, offering burnt sacrifices from the clean animals and birds. The Lord was pleased with Noah's offering and made a covenant with him and his descendants, promising never again to destroy all life on earth with a flood. As a sign of this everlasting covenant, God placed a rainbow in the sky, declaring that whenever it appears, it will serve as a reminder of His promise to all living creatures. God blessed Noah and his sons, instructing them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. He gave them dominion over all the animals and allowed them to eat meat with the command that they must not eat meat with its lifeblood still in it. God also established the principle of justice, declaring that anyone who sheds human blood will be held accountable, for humans are made in the image of God. After the flood, Noah became a farmer and planted a vineyard. One day he drank some of the wine, became drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his 2 brothers. Shem and Japheth, however, took a garment and walked backwards to cover their father without looking at him. When Noah awoke and learned what Ham had done, he cursed Ham's son Canaan, declaring that Canaan would serve his brothers. He blessed Shem and Japheth, praying for their prosperity. Noah lived for 350 years after the flood and died at 950 years. His life became a symbol of righteousness, faith, and obedience to God. Through his sons, the nations of the world were born, and Noah's legacy of faithfulness to God endured. The story of Noah is a powerful narrative of faith, obedience, and renewal. In a world filled with wickedness, Noah stood apart as a righteous man, chosen by God to preserve life and establish a new beginning. His unwavering faith and obedience to God's commands ensured the survival of humanity and the animals. The flood served as both a judgment on sin and a means of cleansing the earth, while the rainbow became a lasting symbol of God's promise of mercy and his faithfulness to all future generations. As believers, we are encouraged to stand for God and shine our light, displacing darkness in our world.
The Israelites, under the leadership of Moses, were close to the end of their 40-year journey in the wilderness. They were camped on the plains of Moab, just across the Jordan River from Jericho, as they prepared to enter the Promised Land. By this time, they had already defeated several powerful kings, which terrified the neighboring nations. Balak, the king of Moab, was deeply afraid of the Israelites because they were numerous and had successfully conquered other nations. He feared that his nation would be next. To stop the Israelites, Balak sought the help of Balaam, a prophet known for his ability to bless and curse people effectively. Balak sent messengers with a rich reward to Balaam, asking him to come and curse the Israelites, believing that a curse would weaken them and help the Moabites defeat them. When the messengers arrived at Balaam's home, Balaam told them to wait overnight while he consulted the Lord. That night, God spoke to Balaam and told him not to go with the men and not to curse the Israelites because they were blessed by God. The next morning, Balaam relayed God's message to Balak's officials, saying,
"The Lord has refused to let me go with you."
Unwilling to give up, Balak sent a second group of officials with even greater promises of reward. Balaam told them,
"Even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God."
However, Balaam again asked the officials to stay overnight while he sought God's guidance. This time, God told Balaam he could go with the men but only speak what he told him to say. The next morning, Balaam set out with the Moabite officials. But God was angry that Balaam had gone, likely because Balaam's heart was still enticed by the potential reward. As Balaam traveled, the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Balaam could not see the angel, but his donkey did. The donkey veered off the road to avoid the angel, and Balaam beat the donkey to get her back on the path. A second time, the donkey pressed against a wall, crushing Balaam's foot, and he struck her again. Finally, in a narrow place where there was no way to turn, the donkey lay down. Balaam, furious, struck the donkey a third time. Then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she spoke, asking Balaam,
"What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?
"You have made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now."
Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?"
Balaam admitted that she had not. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword. The angel rebuked Balaam for his actions and told him that if the donkey had not turned aside, Balaam would have been killed. Balaam repented, and the angel permitted him to continue on his journey, but reiterated that Balaam must only speak what God tells him. Balaam eventually arrived in Moab, where Balak eagerly awaited his curse on Israel. Balak took Balaam to various high places where he could see the Israelites camped below. At each place, Balak prepared sacrifices, expecting Balaam to pronounce a curse. However, each time Balaam opened his mouth to speak, God put words of blessing into his mouth instead of a curse. Despite Balak's growing frustration, Balaam blessed the Israelites 3 different times. Balak, now angry, told Balaam to stop speaking altogether since he was blessing the Israelites instead of cursing them. On the 4th time, Balaam prophesied the coming of a king, interpreted by many as a prophecy of the Messiah, who would crush Israel's enemies. Balaam eventually returns home, but his story doesn't end there. Later, Balaam advised the Moabites and Midianites on how to lead the Israelites into sin by enticing them into sexual immorality and idol worship. As a result, a plague struck Israel, killing many. Balaam was ultimately killed in battle when the Israelites fought against the Midianites. Balaam's desire for wealth and honor from Balak almost led him into disobedience. While he could not curse Israel, his later actions showed his willingness to cause harm to them indirectly. Even when enemies seek to harm God's people, God's protection is over them, and he turns curses into blessings. Balaam's story warns about putting personal gain over obedience to God. Despite his ability to communicate with God, Balaam's love for wealth led to his downfall. In the New Testament, Balaam is an example of someone who loved the wages of wickedness and led others into sin. As believers, we ought not to walk in the way of Balaam.
Judah, Jacob's son, had 3 sons: Onan, and Shelah. Judah chose a Canaanite woman to marry his first son. The name of the Canaanite woman is Tamar. However, was described as wicked in the sight of the Lord, and as a result, God put him to death. This left Tamar a widow without children, as it meant she had no one to carry on the family line or provide for her in her old age. Following the customs of the time, Judah instructed his second son, Onan, to marry Tamar in what is known as a levirate marriage. The purpose of this marriage was to produce offspring in the name of the deceased brother, ensuring his lineage would continue. Onan, however, was unwilling to produce offspring that would not be considered his own, and he avoided impregnating Tamar. This act displeased God, and Onan was also put to death. With 2 of his sons dead, Judah became reluctant to give his third son, Shelah, to Tamar in marriage, fearing that he might also die. Judah told Tamar to live as a widow in her father's house and wait until Shelah grew up. However, Judah did not intend to fulfill this promise, leaving Tamar in a vulnerable and uncertain position. Realizing that Judah had no intention of giving her to Shelah as a wife, Tamar took matters into her own hands. When she learned that Judah was going to Timnah to shear his sheep, she disguised herself as a prostitute and positioned herself along the road to Timnah. Judah saw her but did not recognize her as his daughter-in-law and approached her to sleep with her. Tamar asked for a pledge from Judah in exchange for her services, requesting his seal, cord, and staff, personally identifiable items. Judah agreed, and they slept together, resulting in Tamar's pregnancy. Afterwards, Tamar returned home, removed her disguise, and resumed wearing her widow's garments. When Judah later sent a friend to retrieve his items and pay the prostitute, she was nowhere to be found. 3 months later, when Tamar's pregnancy became known, Judah, unaware of her true identity, ordered that she be brought out and burned for her apparent immorality. However, as she was being brought out, Tamar sent a word to Judah that she was pregnant by the man who owned the seal, cord, and staff. When Judah saw these items, he immediately recognized them as his own and declared, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." Judah acknowledged his failure to fulfill his obligation to Tamar and accepted responsibility. Tamar gave birth to twin sons, Perez and Zerah. During the birth, Zerah put his hand first, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread around it to mark him as the firstborn. However, he drew back his hand, and Perez was born first, with Zerah following. Perez, the firstborn, became a significant figure in the genealogy of Judah, eventually leading to King David and later Jesus Christ. Tamar's story is notable for several reasons. Being a widow, she secured her place in Judah's family. Her actions were motivated by a desire to fulfill her duty to her deceased husband and to secure her place within the community. And here is the lesson. Her inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew highlights her in biblical history, showing the richness of God's mercies and his ability to bring beauty out of the unseemingly ashes of one's past.